Welcome to the Thought Leadership Podcast, where we share insights on how you can become the go-to thought leader in your niche. I'm your host, Alejandro Sanoja, founder and personal branding consultant at Latimpresarios. And today, our guest is Robert Jordan. Robert Jordan has launched companies and helped other owners and investors build their companies for 25 plus years. After founding the first internet coverage magazine in the world, Online Access, and landing on the Inc. 500 list of fastest growing companies, Jordan sold the magazine and began taking on interim CEO gigs. High multiple company sales and IPOs followed. In 2007, he started an online network for interim executives around the globe, expanding to 2,300 executives from 45 countries. Jordan then co-founded Interim Execs, helping owners and investors with powerful leadership on demand through Interim Execs Red Team, Rapid Executive Development. Jordan is the author of How They Did It, Billion-Dollar Insights from the Heart of America, and publishing partner for Start With No, Jim Kemp's best-selling book and audio on negotiation. He's a lifelong Chicagoan with a wife and 2 daughters, plus 2 dogs. Robert, I'm excited that we're having this conversation because there's something I've been thinking a lot related to leadership and your leadership style for a while. I've read these stories of how I think it was in some tribes that in wartime, they would give the leadership to the youngest and best warrior. And that person would carry them through the war times. And then when peacetime came, he automatically would give the leadership to the oldest and wisest person. No questions asked. It just happened naturally because each of them were better suited for those moments. And you talk a lot about that. So I wanted to ask you, are there better leadership styles for different businesses, for different business stages, for different industries, this situation? How would you classify that?
Wow, Alejandro, I'm very impressed. I have never heard that question before. You've done your homework, and thank you for. I'm honored to be on your show with you. It's a great question. I don't know if you ever read science fiction. It's a little off the subject, but there's a famous writer named Orson Scott Card, and he did this whole series. Started with a book called Ender's Game, and the whole point of it was that something threatens Earth and that an older leader was not the solution, that it looked like it was an unsolvable problem. And so it took a younger leader. It's interesting. I have not heard what you're describing before, but to directly answer your question, for sure, we would agree with you that in different stages of an organization's evolution, you absolutely now need different styles, and that some leaders evolve into that. But for most, we talk in the book is called Right Leader, Right Time. In the book, we talk a lot about what is someone's highest and best use. And so the modern age calls for us, all of us who are leaders, to work very hard to be in the situations in which we are in our highest and best use.
And would you say that that should be the goal? Hey, identify your leadership style and just put yourself in that position. So if that means you are a great leader at the early stages, as soon as the company hits a certain revenue level or employee size, just hand it off to someone else and then go do that again, which you see a lot with startup founders. Or would you say, well, actually, if you want to make the leap, you can do it, and this would be the path that you would have to follow if you want to transform yourself into or get the skills from the other different types of leadership?
Both situations are true. The opening of the book, we talk about a phenomenal leader named Troy Hennekoff, who was wonderful early stage. And he realized as his career was progressing, he was not that interested or engaged the bigger the organization became. And so for him, it was a repeat of loving early stage. Then there are examples, though, like Fred Smith. Fred Smith is about to retire. He's been the leader of Federal Express for 51 years since he started it. And he clearly, he's this quintessential example of going through every style you can think of. We would say he was in artist mode in the beginning because he literally created the idea for overnight delivery, as a paper when he was in college. And he went through periods where, there was a question whether FedEx would survive. He was in fixer mode. And there clearly was this builder mode to get to scale. He is someone who evolved into strategist mode. And that is where he arrived at. And it is his highest and best use. If you want to contrast, and I'm going out on a limb here, but I'm going to say it anyway, because Sheryl Sandberg has been in the news recently. She is one of the greatest COOs, chief operating officers of the age of the past decade or two. However, if you read most of the stories about her, they talk about her having a mixed record. And I think the reason is that while she took an organization, she took Facebook, now known as Meta, from $100 million business, couple hundred employees, to $120 billion business, right? 50,000 plus employees. That there was a point at which she, as builder, should have moved on, and it was before 14 years.
Yeah, that's a great point, because as you mentioned, you have those two examples: somebody who was able to make the transition and somebody who maybe was not able to make the transition. So how would you identify what is it that happened? Is it a personality trait, conscientiousness, like maybe the big five, and if you have this one, maybe you would be able to make the transition, so you can go for it? And if you don't have it, like maybe just stick to it. Like, are there any signs, any rules of thumb that we as leaders can use to better understand if we are those that are going to be able to make the transition or not?
It's a great question, and this is is it biblical? Know thyself. I guess the corollary we would say is embrace your best leadership style. It's easy to say, not necessarily easy to do, because when you do that, you are going to, at points, reject things that are not for your highest and best use, to stay on the things at which you are most effective. Does that make sense?
Yes. Now, Robert,
So for example, sorry for interrupting you, Alejandro.
Go ahead.
But each one of the four styles we identified in Right Leader, Right Time, the four styles are fixer, artist, builder, and strategist. They're FABs for short. Each one of those styles, you can see examples around you. We interviewed about 80 leaders for the book. And so we talk about what that is when a fixer is in their highest and best use, when an artist leader is in their highest and best use. There's also a flip side of what happens when you do not have that situation, when that is not occurring, right? In the book, we use a classic example. It's not current, but there was a fixer named Al Dunlap. He got a nickname, Chainsaw Al. He was brought in by the board of a company called Sunbeam. They used to make blenders and consumer products, and they were in trouble. And so he went in and instantly locked, half the workforce, 10,000 people or whatever it was. You're all out of a job. Well, that's one way of doing it. It was brutal. And as it turned out in his career, in the end, there was just manipulation of accounting. It's so even a successful style can run amok, can go too far. And for people who are generally trying to advance themselves, it is first an act of self-reflection, and for people on someone's team to be talking about what it is they do well, what they should be reinforcing, and what things really they ought to be collaborating or delegating on that they're not.
Now, Robert, I wanted to ask you this because it's something I've seen a lot, and since you're an expert on this topic, I've seen that in the past, it seemed that leaders should be tough. We don't talk about personal things. We care about the results and the transactions, but maybe secretly that was kind of like the perception. But then you read about, and I'm blanking out on his name, but the book Trillion Dollar Coach, and how he
Bill
coached people.
Campbell.
Bill Campbell, right? And then it's like, oh, it's about people. It's about those very like 5-15 minutes where you at the beginning of the meeting where you ask about how their life is, and it's like, huh, but never ever before have they talked about the perception is that you should care about people. And now you see people out there, or maybe it's a bubble that I'm seeing of my world, how social media is showing me, but you see people like Gary Vaynerchuk talk about how it's really about understanding his team and getting them to a place where they can excel. And this other side of, hey, letting people work from home, being a little bit more flexible. And then you got Elon Musk saying, no, you can pretend to work somewhere else. You got to come back. So where is the balance? Where is the truth in this world of, no, I got to be tough. We got, this is a transaction. This is not your life. We got to accomplish the goals. And then the other extreme of, well, work is life and life is work. Everything is related. So you got to make it all work.
It's a very rich subject we're getting into. First, though, I have to take issue with you because you called me an expert, and what I'm going to call myself as a student. It took us 5 years to produce this book. This came about as a result of our business, where 7,000 executives had approached us. We run a company called Interim Execs, and if Alejandro, outside your door, you have a lovely setting there with your books. If outside your front door 7,000 people showed up, that would be a line 4 miles long. Well, in our business, we're matchmakers, and between organizations that show up and have needs, and we match them with leaders. Seeing all of these leaders show up over a 10-year period, we saw this pattern of what was not successful leadership, as opposed to these 4 successful styles. So we interviewed a bunch of people. We went through this process of writing the book. I view this as the start of my next 25-year journey. This is like a marathon. And literally, in some ways, it is a start, because we've said something we want to be able to prove with more science at some point. So we're also launching something called FAB's Leadership Assessment. It's a free assessment people can take to get some more insight into themselves and their wiring. Am I wired more as a fixer, an artist, a builder, a strategist? Okay. You're touching on a great point here about toughness in a leader. I am much more a fan of, if you listen to Brene Brown and vulnerability. I think that we are in an age where our teams, our family, our friends, we show up as genuine, or we don't show up at all. It's not to say that confidence doesn't have a place. Confidence absolutely has a place in leadership. And early on in people's leadership journeys, in many cases, you're doing things you haven't done it before. And so, you do need to step up into that. But I would say that more than the concept of toughness is this idea of being open and frank and honest with people. In particular, this is what I think I'm really good at, and this is the stuff I don't think I'm that great at. What do you think? And we've been asked now by a lot of teams, how do you put this into work to know you're wired more as a fixer or as a builder, a strategist? How does that actually play? We would say the first step is have a conversation, because on your team at work, I want to know you better. And I think we're going to perform better as a team if you get to know me better.
Mm-hmm. Are there any, you talk a lot, I read some of the work about difficult conversations, and we've definitely been through some of those in our business, and I wanted to get your take on how do you approach that conversation. Let's say somebody who is performing a job below the standards of what everybody else is doing in the company, or someone who seems to be going through a tough time, but like they were doing great and suddenly their performance is not up to where it was. So there's something going on in their life, right? Like maybe not telling you, but maybe they're going through a divorce, maybe their family is going through something, like something is happening there that this person that used to perform at this stage is not doing it anymore. Are there any questions that you ask yourself? Like something that I do, for example, is I do the Sedona method and just release everything that I'm thinking and any prejudgments that I'm having about this person, so that I don't come into the conversation with any predispositions. But are there any before, during, and after tasks that you recommend someone to do whenever they're about to have that difficult conversation with the team member?
It's a great question. The first thing I think for all of us, it's what's in us, not the other person. And so, for example, I am a big fan of meditation, and we did a prior book called How They Did It, which was a series of interviews with champion company founders. And one of the founders, he had taken an IT services company from a couple people to 2,000 people. And when we interviewed him, it was like, how did you do that? How do you do that? And he said, you have to be at the center. And he meant you have to be at the center of yourself. That there's some part of you that has to be grounded and foundational and know what you stand for and know what you believe in. And if you can have that center in you, now you can go out into the world and do great things. And not everything is going to work, and not every difficult conversation is going to be great. But if you are first within you, if you first can get some grip on who you are, then approaching that hard conversation is something you can do with more authenticity. You mentioned Bill Campbell, The $1 Trillion Coach. It's a terrific book. He did something that is easy. We should all be doing it, which is that he would start every conversation with, how you doing? How was the weekend? How's your family? Because he did really want that connection. He was very big on hugging people. Mm-hmm. Don't know how that would work now. But he first showed up as a real human being, and he delivered hard messages. He would tell people, I don't think you're in the right position if something was off. If somebody lost in a conflict, he would say it didn't go your way. And he was a huge proponent for the team. And so that was his grounding. His foundational element there is we do this for the team. We do this for the health of this organization we're all trying to grow. And inside of that context, that hopefully makes a difficult conversation easier.
Yeah, that's a great point, Robert. And so you've mentioned vulnerability, difficult conversations with your team. And this reminds me of recently I was applying for a fellowship, and they were asking me about the accomplishments that I felt most proud of. And we're pretty open and vulnerable in the company. We allow people, if they wanna have side gigs, that's cool. We just like, hey, this is what you gotta do. There's no schedule. We have a couple of meetings. We're all virtual, but we have the plan, do the plan. And if you're doing what you're supposed to do, that's good. We're not gonna micromanage anyone. So when I was sharing those moments, if instead of any particular revenue growth, any rankings, any recognition that we have received, I thought, wow, when they come to me and they're excited and they share that they landed X client outside for their particular activity that they want to do, or when they come and they say, wow, I didn't see it before, but I see how valuable our group is because I did this other thing at this other place and they were yelling at me because I was I don't know, a day late, and here nobody has ever yelled at me. And I was thinking, and now they're starting to share with me some other life challenges they're facing, and I've been able to help them with sometimes financial, some other challenges. And I was thinking, wow, this is really what leadership is about. This is how you know you're leveling up, or at least that insight came to me. The more they reveal about their struggles and the more personal they get, the better the leader you are, because they mean they trust you with what's going on. So of course, you've been studying this more than I have been. So are there any milestones thinking about leadership through that lens that you could use as knowing that you are leveling up in the game of leadership? Let's toss aside all the KPIs and the revenue and size of the team and timelines, and think about the human in the team. Does anything come to mind when thinking about, oh, I know this year I'm a better leader because X, Y, and Z happened with my team that it didn't happen last year?
One of the things that's occurred for me, because now I've been studying these 4 different styles of leadership for so long, between fixer, artist, builder, and strategist, is that for me, there's no longer a one-size-fits-all answer. So, for example, if you are wired as a fixer, then your experience of leadership, projects you take on, the progress is going to be very different from those other styles. One of the fixer leaders we interviewed, her name is Michelle Barnes. She was appointed by the governor of Colorado as the head of human services. When she was doing turnaround work prior to for the state of Colorado, she talked about the day when she could tell the team got it, and that it went from crisis mode to essentially the people on the team picking up the ball and running with it themselves, no longer looking at her every day like, what do we do now? It's an indefinable moment, but it's not. It is definable. There's just this moment, and she realized she could back off a bit. And that further, there would be a point where she said, you know, you bring someone like her in, it's really intense. And there's a point where it's too much, and that the organization has, in fact, they have new structure in place, and it's going to be a permanent improvement, and they're ready and they can run with it. And so for the fixer, that's a thing that is defined, if you will, that it has its sense of, oh, this is the milestone. Another one of the fixers we interviewed, he said, I know that day will always come in the organization, and that the turnaround's done. The team has it. And he says, it's still a terrible day. Because he now has people he trusts and loves, and they love working with him. But he's got to go move on. And so that mode looks like that. It's very different if, for example, we talk about an artist leader. That kind of wiring is, we describe it as compelled. And what we mean by that is that if you view the world, the artist leader views the world as a blank canvas, as a piece of clay to be molded. And if that is your wiring, it is the thing you will do, even at your peril, even at risk of job and money and status and everything. You have to be into things that are involved in creation or recreation. And so there you're looking at something different as a milestone. For the artist, the key milestone is, can you ship? Which is to say, can you get this team's creation to the point of viability, whether it is to an audience, a message, a product that is being shipped, you have to see that point, or you're not an effective artist leader.
Yeah, that's a good point, that it's different. As you were talking about that, it made me curious.
Wait, sorry, I got to back up. What was the fellowship you were applying for?
I don't remember. I think it was a fit for service. I'm trying to tap into my feminine and flowing side. I'm too much of OCD type person, and I've been listening a lot about breathing exercises. Like I said, I'm doing the Sedona method, and if I would have read that book 3 years ago, I would have said that it's all crap and it's woo-woo, and now I'm loving it. So it was this event where we were going to do, I think it was a bunch of business leaders, and we were going to do breath work and something called ecstatic dancing. And I thought, just by the name of it, I felt uncomfortable. So I was like, okay, I should go. But it was great. It was an event in Austin, and I loved it. But yeah, it shocked me because I'm such a results-driven person. And usually those, what are you, that when people would ask me kind of like your highlights, I would think, well, I graduated top of my class, I did this, I built this business, revenue, and the things that came right away when I thought about that were the people, that impact that I had in those conversations. So I was like, this is new. And it really, it made me think that there's something there, that it's no longer about you when you really become a leader. It's about the people around you. And I wanted to ask you, and I have to be completely vulnerable. I usually read the books before doing the interviews, but I did not know there was a book. I did research on your company page and on the LinkedIn page, but I wasn't.
Yeah, no worries. The book. No worries. Don't worry. So everybody is pressed and reading. You know, I got to tell you how hard it is, even when you've authored something. And I have a business partner and co-author, but to have to reread 50, 60,000 words repeatedly is like, oh my God. So yeah, I'm giving you the Cliff Notes version anyway, and you're going to be fine.
Yeah, I want to thank you for your patience in maybe going through some of the basics that might be in the book. So thank you for that. But I wanted to ask you, how do you come up with that framework? I know psychology has their big five, but I was always curious on, okay, how is it that you come up with, you think there's a better way to categorize leadership? And so you, as you said, you became a student. How did you come up with this for archetypes?
It's a great question. Just to tell you, the thing that compelled my co-author, Olivia Wagner, and I to do the book was more the tragedy that the majority of the 7,000 executives who had shown up on our doorstep were experiencing careers that were not all that remarkable. And so part of this was that being observers of that and really getting into it, because when we formed our business and started deploying executives into projects and organizations around the world, we saw the opposite. We saw how the best performing leaders performed. It was so glaringly different between these highly effective leaders and a lot of these people who were not doing great. And so the impetus for the book was, my God, it would be so good earlier on in someone's leadership journey to talk to them about this, to be just aware of the pitfalls and how most leaders, the majority of leaders, were screwing up. The converse were these best leaders, and we saw these 4 different styles. We didn't set out to write a book. We have a business, and in that business of being a matchmaker, we saw what worked. And it became so obvious over time that the wiring of these incredible leaders was not the same. It wasn't like one person's excellence is another, and we learn from them. And so, for example, it's very big for us in the book to say great leaders reject that which is not for their highest and best use. Well, we saw it firsthand, because we would just learn. We would expose a great leader to an opportunity, an organization, and they're telling you, and so you bring something that's in crisis to someone and say they need help, and for someone to say, yeah, that's not me. And for somebody else, what we label the fixer leader, this person is wired to run into the burning building time after time, is to say, yes, this distress, this awful thing they're facing, I am the person for this. This is what I have designed my career for, is to solve this problem for them. But the thing, for example, about that wiring is once that situation is fixed, they have to move on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so
that's what led to this framework, was seeing these 4 radically different styles.
And as you were going, so I imagine, okay, you're working and you're noticing trends, you're noticing elements that work and elements that don't. Then when it came time to actually create the framework, did you consult maybe some of the other psychological models that are out there to make sure that you were not doing something as similar? Or like, how did that work?
Well, over the years, we had become students of different kinds of profiles and testing mechanisms. And in our work, we have to be. And so some of them were big fans and some we weren't. The beginning of how employees and managers were measured was first simply intelligence tests. Then came personality tests, which are called affective. If you think of something like Myers-Briggs, where it's looking at personality, and then something called cognitive tests, which are the instinctive, intuitive way in which you or I perform work. And there's a particular profile that is a cognitive test. It's called Colby, and we love it. And so we're fans of some of these, and this, we could see as it was developing, was not like any of those. It was not to take away anything from any other assessments that are very legitimate. This is what we feel is just a different new overlay that can help an individual in their own leadership journey, and even more so help the team. It's the FAB's leadership assessment that is still in beta, but it's being developed and it's about to come out. It's free. And so for anybody that wants to learn, or suggest to a friend to go take it, learn more about yourself. But it's not to take away from other really, really valuable profiles, methods, metrics that I think are very valuable inside organizations.
Robert, if we take a step back, even from that component of understanding what type of leader you are, do you think, and I know this question has been asked in many ways, nature versus nurture, but do you think there are some people who are more prone and are going to excel in leadership positions and people who are not? And if so, well, let's start there. I have a lot of follow-up questions, but because it's my view that it's not easy to be a leader. I always tell the story of Christopher Columbus when he was pitching the deal to get the money to go and find the new world and find the treasure. He had never been on a boat. He had never directed a crew, never been on a boat. And he was just like pure vision, trusting himself. And you see this all over again, the Steve Jobs story, right? Like sold the computers without ever, before having the computers. So there's that component of absolute trust and certainty that, of course, can go the wrong way. We've seen the stories. I forgot the name of the lab company that had a Netflix series in the book. I forgot the blood testing
Theranos.
Theranos. So of course, like too much vision. If you believe it, it could be a lie, and that's not good. But do you think that there are people that are more prone to be leaders and they should pursue that, and some others that don't, and they might just be focused on, hey, I'm going to be a really good team player. I'm going to be, I don't know, the defense in the midfield, and I'm not going to score the goals or take the lead, but I'm going to do my job really well? Or do you think that's like whoever wants to, if life puts them in a position, they can become a leader?
You're asking a key question, and also I'm not sure I did justice, what we were talking about before. Part of what we did when we interviewed lots of leaders for the book, we also interviewed psychologists, an organizational psychologist, to ask them, do you think we're crazy? Because before developing the FAB's leadership assessment, it's just, is this idea, does it sound rational or not? And so all of the leaders, all these wonderful operational leaders, we asked all of them what they thought. But we also had a set of psychologists and did the same thing with them. And it was basically, are we crazy? So it was the first validation we sought, which is no one said, you're nuts. It passed the smell test, if you will. So it's interesting talking about, people wired for leadership or not. Gallup organization did a study and said 90% of leaders are in the wrong role. And one of the organizational psychologists we interviewed in the book, his name is Bob Murray. He's a brilliant, I'm going to mess up the exact title because it's kind of the biology of how humans live in society and are wired. And what he said to us is that traditional tribal society really wasn't wired to need leaders. It's not necessarily part of human wiring that in traditional cultures, you'd have a village of 150 people or so, you knew everyone. Those kind of cultures don't necessarily need, we have to have a leader in front of us. It's not necessarily part of wiring. Our wiring, it has evolved in corporations and organizations the way that it is, that there is going to be hierarchy. But I'll tell you, Alejandro, I think one of our primary points with having put out the book is to a lot of leaders to put out this message, which is get over yourselves. Because leadership of organization, if you're really good at it, is only one of an infinite forms of human genius. And we pay too much attention to it because our culture is too monetary. And so leaders who are really successful get rich. Many, maybe not deservedly so, but we celebritize that. And one of the problems in business and organization is we assume because a leader has done one thing well, they can do everything well. Completely not true. Completely not true. And in other areas of human excellence and professionalism, we've moved beyond this. We have not yet in business and organization. So an example we use in the book is in medicine. You and I, next time I see you, we're going to have a nice lunch, and you're going to tell me you've been really having a lot of pain in your foot. You're a runner and I don't know what's going on. Well, if I know a great podiatrist, even better podiatrist who specializes in running, I'm going to say, Alejandro, you got to see this guy, he really helped me. I am not going to send you to a cardiologist or an OBGYN. I'm just not going to do it. And so there is this field, medicine, that professionalized and developed specialties to the point where if I sent you to the cardiologist, he or she would say, you need to go to a podiatrist. I don't do this. They're not even going to try to solve the problem because it wouldn't be professional. Yet in business, oh my God, somebody does one thing and it works, and we just think they can do everything. No one is all things to all people. Swiss Army knife approach to excellence in organizations. It went out long ago. That message has not been received everywhere. And so we see continually examples of failure that rack up because of that.
So how can we then make it cool to be, and this might be out of the scope of what you've been studying, but it came to mind because you see, for example, the star players, right? And they get all the credit sometimes, and the star leaders in every area, there's like the star people that get the credit, and some do a really good job of sharing that credit, and the organization thrives. An example that comes to mind is Stephen Curry recently was coming off the bench, and that was just crazy. Why would he do that? And he knew the team was in a rhythm. He's humble enough to say, well, I don't want to miss that. Let me just come off the bench and give what I can do. So is there a way that we can promote people to be an individual contributor? It's okay if you don't want to lead, you can do that. Or at the same time, get people to understand that, yeah, some people, there's an 80-20 rule, and some people are going to do more, and they're just more talented in this area. Let's support them because it helps the organization in that way. And they also deal with some other challenges, like the best CEOs or the leaders have to go to some maybe interviews and have to do some of the things that the regular contributor, the regular team member, they don't have to do that. So maybe sharing overall the pros and cons of all the different positions. I'm just like brainstorming here, but I wanted to get your take on how do we make it cool also to not be a leader?
I like the phrase, one of the psychologists we interviewed, he said, you got to be spiky. And what he meant is that if you and I were looking at a graph and it showed all of these traits people have at work, right? And it could be specific, like excellence in coding in this particular language, or it could be excellence across things like hard work and curiosity, just all of these different dimensions. You need to be spiky in a couple ways, meaning you have to be distinct. You have to have this desire to excel, but it is not across everything. This gets back to the prior point. None of us are great at everything. And great teams are made up of complementary spikiness, including the leaders on that team who have to be accretive or additive to the team. It's no longer sufficient just to say, well, I'm looking at all the rest of you. I don't need to contribute anything else other than I'm looking at you. Everyone needs to be spiky. Everyone needs to be accretive on the team. What we also researched for the book, it was these 4 distinct styles: fixer, artist, builder, strategist. And it was also 3 common kind of foundations or pillars that we saw across these excellent leaders. Okay. And the first one was doubling down. So this urge, this will, that as people were advancing in their careers and to see how they were wired, you know, that if someone was a builder, they loved taking small teams, earlier products and services, putting system and process and people into place and taking it to scale. But we saw those builders then at that point wanted to go and do it all over again. Well, that kind of do it all over again is a doubling down inside your own highest and best use. So we saw doubling down, right? We also saw a superior ability to collaborate, which gets to your earlier point, which is to say, great collaborators, it's not just talking about it, it is that everyone becomes worthwhile and contributing on the team. And we don't all need to be in leadership roles. You know, there's a famous story about Google that an engineer at some point tried an experiment, which is that when search results come up, what would happen if you highlighted, you bold-faced the result, from the original search term. Tried an experiment, and it caused a 400% bump in what was viewed as the most favorable results. Well, Google at the time was a $5 billion profit organization. This was fairly early on. So that one engineer, I don't know if they were in a leadership role, probably not, caused Google to become a $20 billion earnings organization. He made Google 4 times more valuable from his single actions. You don't need to be a leader anymore to be a valuable contributor. And again, to the other point, this is not all about leadership. The forms of human genius and excellence are infinite. We cite one example that it fascinates me because this is something I'm terrified by, which is skateboarding. And on Google you can read any how-to on anything. And so there are very detailed tutorials. Alejandro, do you skateboard?
I used to. It's funny that you asked and mentioned that, because I used to when I was a teenager, and I would do whatever. I think like at that point you don't care. And then I tried it again as an adult. I said, well, maybe I could do a little bit of exercise. I remember doing this, and I was scared. I don't know if you're a little bit more conscious. I don't know if you heal way slower than what you used to, but I could not do it. I just I'm not doing this. I don't want to fall. Like the cars are coming, too many things are moving.
Well, so there's a particular tutorial about how you drop into a bowl, in a skate park. And it's detailed instructions. The bowl is, most of them, they're about 5 feet. And these steps, you plant the back of the board on the rim, you put your weight on the back, your back foot is facing 90 degrees, your front foot is forward. And then there comes this point where you have to commit 100% of you to your front foot. And basically what it means is you have to fall forward, head down, nothing, you just 100%. And if it's only 99% of you committed, you're gonna fall. You will not end up on the board at the bottom of the bowl. And those kinds of things, I think, are infinite examples of human expression and human excellence, of which the management of organizations is just one little piece. And I think we need to keep that kind of perspective in mind here.
And I think the Google story is great. I've read a lot of books on the topic, and I know that, I don't remember who is it, but he was talking about that you have superstars and rock stars, and you got to nurture the rock stars. Those are people who are not going to make it up the ladder, but they're really good at what they do. And they were trying to, because of course money is not everything, and there's a lot of research that shows that if you use money as a reward for particular skills, it can actually backfire and make people less creative. But it certainly is one of the goals and the elements that people want to achieve. So do you have any thoughts on how to make sure that you're also aligning incentives with those individual contributors when their positions are not easily correlatable with revenue, right? Because in that particular instance, yeah, that change is easy. And there's some others, right? Like output. If you do sales, you can easily correlate with revenue. If you do project management, this many projects equals this revenue, or this many deliverables. But there's some others that, I don't know, in our case, let's say, I don't know, we have a videographer who changed some elements of the videos, and now these videos are ranking better on YouTube. It's like, wow, just like that little change. So do you have any thoughts on that? How can you incentivize individual contributors to perform better in their particular area without having to necessarily tell them the only way to grow here is to be a leader?
It's a great question, and I'll share a couple thoughts. One of the strategist leaders we interviewed, he talked about strategists is defined as the leader operating at scale. Organizations in complexity and size that are completely beyond personal span of control of a leader. Now, if you and I are at a company that has 25 or 50 employees, we can really all get to know each other. If you're running an organization of 10,000 people, you are never going to have a personal relationship on which to rely to cause that organization to be excellent. If you're running a part of it, all of it. And what this leader said, 14,000 people, he said, the question of incentives is, first you have to understand it's not the same for everyone. Mm-hmm. It will not be. And that, for example, in a large organization, you have this top end, these star performers. And in a way, you really don't need to worry about them because their sense of self-motivation and ambition is so high. They've taken care of that themselves. He said there's a bottom of the organization as well, which is they're not in it. And sooner or later, something's going to happen there as well. He said there's this vast middle. And that is where you have to be very sensitive to figure out what are the incentives that will cause that vast middle to perform better than any competition. I thought that was really interesting. The other thing I would say, Alejandro, and I don't know if this is a complete answer, but I'm fascinated with what we become committed to. And what I mean is that, for example, I was reading a book called Second Mountain recently, and very big on this idea of what do you do at the stage in your career when it becomes more about meaning and purpose, less so about the money and the rank and the title and the privileges. And I realized as I was reading this, like, oh my God, I got committed to this. I mean, in some ways, I'm your classic entrepreneur. I've been involved in a lot of different businesses, but it happens when talking, for example, about my company called Interim Execs. Well, I've been at that now a lot of years. And the book, now Right Leader, Right Time, well, it's as if I've doubled down because I've now taken on a new mission in terms of how to promote accountable, excellent leadership. I think it's a new 25-year journey. I don't know the exact point I became committed, but now I know it's not about the money. It has nothing to do with the money. There's something bigger that is driving me, and it's purpose. And so that is the thing you seek. I think that we all want to seek in career and our work is what is it that we can and will become committed to, not because of any outside incentive. And so for a leader, what behooves them is figuring that out about themselves and then about the people around them. If it is committed about that team, that company, project, client set, whatever it is, then it points to how those incentives are going to best work. And if they're not committed, on the other hand, it points to a very different conversation because no incentives in the world are going to matter.
Yeah, absolutely. You said it right there, right? Like there's some people who are, no matter what you do, they're self-motivated and they're going to do it. And I think to your point, there's some people at the bottom that also, no matter what you do, like they're going maybe through a phase where there's nothing you can do to help them get out of it.
It's also not, sorry to interrupt you, Alejandro,
but
not even to put labels of high, medium, low. So much of the world has become project-based. LinkedIn years ago, they started welcoming new employees by saying, we know it's highly likely you will not spend your entire career with us. Mm-hmm. More going to be a tour of duty. And so what are we going to do to be highly effective? And even knowing that that's the situation, that we're going to have a great time working together. What do we do? And we cite things like, the movie industry has been like this now for a long time, that everyone comes together to make a great movie. The actors, the producers, the gaffers, the key grip, script writers, hundreds of different specialties come together to make a great movie. It's completely understood that when that movie's done, when it's a wrap, disband. It doesn't mean they leave their careers. They're all going to move on to another movie or another Netflix series. There's nothing wrong with that as a model. It promotes their individual excellence and how a great team could come together. How's that grab you?
Well, that's a great point. And again, this is the bubble that I see, right? Because like we are in the digital marketing space. So this is one of the spaces where this is happening. Everybody's trying to become a media company. Everybody is out there. There's a lot of flexibility. We can work remote because most of the time we don't really need to be in a room. So that model of people just like working on their career and their craft and coming together for something, that makes a lot of sense. I'm also thinking about, and again, you don't want to boil down everything to a number and see what is it that you're contributing, because as you said, it's more than that. But I think now that the pandemic happened, people are getting a lot more vulnerable. How much is it that they're really working? And we see that with the Tesla example that Elon Musk said, where everybody's going to have to come back because you can pretend to work somewhere else. But what if you just paid people for exactly what they do? What if there's a model where, hey, if you just want to work 2 hours and the rest you want to be with your family, you don't want to commute, and you want to do some other things? What if you could, instead of like having to pay somebody a full-time salary and pay everything, what if you could just like, okay, this is as much as you want to do, kind of like an Uber that you put on, you do as much as you want to do, and then you click off. Of course, I know that I'm only thinking about my industry where that's a little bit simpler. But when you were talking about it, that came out because it's happening with us. Like we work super great in that model of remote and asynchronous, and it brings a lot of happiness because you can really live your life in the now instead of thinking that, well, when I retire, I'm going to spend time with my kids, or when I do X. That might mean that you're going to sacrifice some income. I'm sure that if you go all in and you put your obsessiveness and you're a superstar, you can make a lot more money. But it's really about being honest with who you are and what is it that you want to do. And I know you talk a lot. I saw some snippets of the internal instability and how to deal with that. So do you have any thoughts on, because we've had some vulnerable and difficult conversations with some people in our company when we saw the symptoms before it grew out into a full-blown disease. We want to tackle it as soon as possible and ask them what's going on, how can we support you, etc. Are there any signs that you think leaders should pay attention that tell them that something is going on and a difficult conversation must happen before it turns into a full-blown disease that might be a little bit more difficult to treat than just the beginnings of internal instability?
One of the things we did with all the leaders we interviewed is we said, what kind of habits do you have? And part of it was we were interviewing phenomenally successful people. And what do you do? Because what do you get at that? And so it was interesting. For example, we interviewed Mike Lorelli, the former president of Pepsi, and he now takes on CEO roles, mostly at private companies. But he said one of the things is he likes to get into the plant, be the first one there. Why? Because he wants to see what it's really like. When do people arrive? How do they set up? and he tends to deal with manufacturing companies. And it's a little bit of what happens when your people are having unguarded moments. It's like, oh, the boss is here, and to have conversations that are not formal and they're not prepared for. And as a way that he could really get to know people and figure out who they were and what they were up to. And they could just have these one-on-one conversations. We interviewed Christy Hefner, former CEO of Playboy Enterprises, and she said, because she was raised as a journalist, she said she never would have a meeting with a group of people where she was the first speaker, where everyone had to talk at that meeting, had to be 100% participation to figure out what was going on and what was the thrust of it. So there are all kinds of techniques in terms of communication. Talked to a wonderful leader where he said, what kind of habits? And he said, well, we won't make big radical new policies on Friday afternoons. It's like, why not? He said, because if you try to do something major, either something went wrong and you need a new fix or something is Friday afternoon, he said, people are already checked out. They're thinking about their kid's soccer game on Saturday. They're thinking about the picnic on Sunday. And probably whatever you're going to put into place, or you're releasing new code or whatever it is, it's going to break. So are you all going to get pulled in on Saturday or Sunday? And, we think we run 24/7, but it's interesting, even like reading now about Sheryl Sandberg and Mark Zuckerberg, the cadence of their meetings were Monday morning, were Monday and Friday. So I don't care how techy the business is, there's still a sense of cadence to our work. And so there are all kinds of techniques in terms of getting at how do you have more communication and more varied communication with your team.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, communication there is a key so that you can see when those moments happen.
Alejandro, it all starts with you and me. I mean, it all starts with ourselves as leaders before it's going out to somebody who you wonder how they're doing or what the problem is. I'll tell you one more habit we thought was pretty good and pretty funny. We interviewed a woman who runs a very large organization of therapists, physical therapists, occupational therapists, speech therapists. And she has contracts with the Philadelphia school system and others. And so they do wonderful work. We said, do you have any success habits? She said, well, I've got my angry swim.
Like, angry swim, that sounds interesting.
What's an angry swim? And she said, well, if she knew she was going to have a tough conversation with a lawyer, with someone on the staff, whatever, she said she had to get a swim in the morning, and it was going to be an angry swim. And she was going to get it out in the pool before she was going to have that conversation.
That's
pretty good. It tied in. We didn't put this in the book, but recently we interviewed a former White Sox pitcher. And he'd been a starter and then he moved to relief. Now I'm a sports idiot. And I said, well, is there a big difference between the starting pitcher, Major League Baseball, or relief? And he said, it's huge. And it took him a long time to make the transition. He said, but in the end, he liked being a relief pitcher more because he was on fire. If you're the starting pitcher, you're trying to make it through the whole game. If you're relief, he's like, you're just a maniac for one inning, maybe. And he said it was also perfect because if he had any anger, if he was having an angry day, it came out in the pitching where it should.
Yeah, that's a good point. We got to find what's our method of releasing the emotion before the meeting so that we are not bringing any of those preconceptions or pre-thoughts and be really open. Yeah, that's a great point. Now, Robert, we've talked about understanding your leadership style and how is it that you can use that information to put yourself in a position to win in your career and in your company. We've talked about how to identify if you have the material to be a leader or not, how to nurture the people around you. We've talked about your company and how you're basically doing matchmaking with companies and leaders. There's a lot there. So when people ask you, what do you do? What is your typical answer?
I want to be the greatest matchmaker on the planet, or rather our organization, Interim Execs, that companies, for-profit, non-profit, public companies, private companies, show up when there is a leadership need. We're not headhunters. We are project-based. But if they have that need, that we will try to be of service. It's not necessarily that it's going to work in all cases, but because we've been at this so long, we have this thing called Red Team, Interim Execs Red Team, stands for Rapid Executive Deployment. And so where it's appropriate, we put members of Red Team into organizations for projects, and overwhelmingly, it causes phenomenal results. And so that's what I'm committed to. As I said, it's more than the money. There is a joy in seeing that work that I love, and I have to do that.
Is there any particular kind of leader or any particular kind of company or industry that is a best fit?
It's a great question. This kind of work, hard to do with startups because there's not enough there. And it really is what in the private equity world is called the middle market, or the lower middle market, which are these organizations that are striving, but they're not the Fortune 500, and therefore they're constrained. They don't have unlimited cash. They don't have unlimited teams or unlimited depth in their leadership team. And so if they're going to strive for big goals or they have big issues, they're going to need help. And that's where we excel.
Well, Robert, this has been a marvelous conversation. I'm going to take a lot from what we talked about today and implement it with my team. I have a lot of ideas. I want to be mindful of time. Is there anything else that you would like to share? We'll link to the book, we'll link to the website, your LinkedIn profile. We'll put that in the show notes whenever we share the videos on YouTube. But anything else that you would like to share with the audience before we close?
Alejandro, you're awesome, and we are complete. We've covered it all. You're
Thank
amazing.
you very much. Thank you very much, Robert. I appreciate the conversation. And for anybody out there listening, thank you very much. And we'll see you in the next episode.